Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a bustling Roman domus, where your pet pug lounges on a silk cushion judging your every move. You trudge through marbled hallways bathed in golden torchlight, and for a moment, you think you're the guest of honor, until the household greyhound gives you a side eye for not bringing more treats. You probably won't survive this pampering parade if you can't handle dripping fountains and perfumed floors, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're surrounded by marble statues, one of a laughing Dionysus, another of a stoic Mars, but the real stars are panting beside you. In elite Roman circles, keeping dogs, birds, fish, even monkeys wasn't just a hobby, it was a status symbol. A mainstream historical fact. By the 1st century CE, wealthy Romans commonly imported exotic animals like peacocks and parrots from distant provinces, a trend that cost far more than a legionnaire's annual salary. Yet your focus is on Fido, the decked in a tiny jeweled collar so bright it could blind a centurion. Imagine your host dismissing common curs at the door. Only the prettiest lapdogs deserve entry. You might notice a quirk. Some aristocrats fed their pets gold flakes suspended in honeyed wine, believing it brought good health. Quirky tidbit, right? And if you think that's over the top, consider that one senator reportedly had his spaniel's paws painted with henna before dinner parties. Historians still argue whether these rituals were mere vanity or earnest care. You tiptoe past a mosaic depicting your host's first bulldog, purchased during his governorship in Gaul. The mosaic's miniature paw prints sparkle with embedded glass tesserae. In your mind, you compare that to your own stained couch at home. Suddenly, IKEA pet beds seem utterly passé. A gentle jab, but hey, we're all friends here. As you settle into a low chaise lounge, the household manager offers you spiced water, a fringe glimpse of reality. Romans believed that bathing dogs in vinegar and water kept fleas at bay, an anti-parasitic remedy that doubled as a perfumed soak. You sip and wonder whether your own flea shampoo would impress ancient veterinarians. A valet approaches, carrying a silver tray stacked with crisp biscuits made of barley and cheese, shaped to look like miniature Roman helmets. You pocket one for yourself, a morale boost for surviving this extravagance. Little jokes aside, these treats illustrate how ordinary dog biscuits evolved into culinary art, complete with engravings of the imperial eagle. Yes, even the crumbs had propaganda value. Meanwhile, you notice a scholarly debate bubbling among your fellow guests. Were these pets truly companions or mere trophies in a grand display of wealth? Historians still argue whether the line between affection and ostentation blurred entirely in Roman elite culture. Another sip of wine, and you muse on your own Instagram habit. Double tap for a puppy in a toga. You lean forward as a tiny lapdog snores beside you, its paws twitching in dream chases of rodents long extinct. You're grateful for the soft padding of your own cushioned seat, but also oddly jealous of that pampered pooch. A sleepy ASMR whisper. Feel the calming drip of the fountain outside, the rustle of silk drapes overhead, and the faint echo of a cockerel crow. You almost forget you're 2,000 years away from home. A final light joke. If you thought your neighbor's poodle was spoiled, just remember that Roman pups had personal attendants called molissari, whose sole job was to attend to their every whim. You stifle a chuckle at the absurdity, yet inwardly admit a twinge of envy. You slip into the next chamber, where the air feels cooler against your skin, a deliberate design to soothe those pampered paws. The polished marble floor glistens like a moonlit pond, and everywhere you look there's a cushion embroidered in purple and gold. Not for guests, but for the pack of aristocratic dogs who patrol these halls like royalty. Can you feel that faint vibration underfoot? That's the hollow heating channels, or hypocaust, keeping the floor just warm enough to chase away the morning chill. Romans installed them beneath their pet quarters as early as the 1st century CE, ensuring no canine suffered cold paws. You pause by an ornate bronze bowl set on a low pedestal. Instead of ordinary water, it holds a delicate broth steeped with herbs, dill, mint, and a hint of myrtle, meant to aid digestion and keep coats shiny. A mainstream historical fact: wealthy Romans often fed their dogs soft meats, finely chopped vegetables, and even oyster shells, ground into powder for calcium, treating canine nutrition as seriously as their own. Try picturing your own dog gulping down sardine pâté, or worse, your neighbor's chunky kibble, and you shudder. Across the room, a spaniel with curly ears snoozes in a gilded crib fashioned like a miniature trireme. Its blanket of dyed silk shifts in color from crimson to lavender, depending on the angle. You might recall the mosaic of that bulldog from last time. Here, tiny glass beads stud the crib's prow, glimmering with every breath the dog takes. It's enough to make you reconsider the hand-me-down dog bed you scored, whether these glitzy adornments offered any real benefit or were purely ostentatious displays. Some call you meander toward a small pool, its walls decorated with relief sculptures of dogs chasing hares. The gentle trickle of water invites the pack in for a cooling dip. Romans believed frequent swims improved circulation and kept joints nimble. A fringe detail: in one villa near Pompeii, archaeologists discovered a special dog bathing niche, complete with a leash ring embedded in the stone, so the owner could towel off the soggy spaniel without losing grip. You wonder if your own leash has ever felt so secure. Nearby, a valet offers to oil your hands with a soothing blend of olive oil and rose petals. You accept, but glance at the valet's second tray, an assortment of tiny brushes and combs fashioned from ivory and boar bristles. Grooming your host's molossus breed is a sacred ritual that takes longer than some senators' morning baths. Imagine your own morning routine. 10 minutes to shower, 5 more to mash avo toast, and then multiply that by 20. That's how seriously Romans treated doggy demure. You settle onto a cushioned bench as a procession begins. First comes the setter, its ears dusted with violet-scented talcum powder. Then the greyhound, robes flowing around its neck like a toga, each fold embroidered with the owner's family crest. Finally, the little lapdog, wearing a tiny gold diadem, struts forward as if auditioning for a chariot race. You note the rhythmic clink of bell-adorned collars echo through the marbled vestibule. Those collars often bore inscriptions: Cave canem, not to warn of danger, but to flatter the dog's dignity, a playful nod to the warning mosaic you passed earlier. If you think this is excessive, consider the medical attention on hand. A modest infirmary sits just off the main room. Poultices, warm compresses, and even surgical tools for removing spines or foreign objects. Mainstream scholars point out that Roman veterinarians, called Veterinarii, frequently treated both livestock and beloved companions, reflecting a genuine concern for animal welfare. But historians still argue whether this care extended beyond showmanship. Were dogs healed out of empathy or to preserve the lavish spectacle they provided? A stray thought. You brush away a stray petal that drifted onto your lap, courtesy of the perfumed oils dancing in the air. Down the corridor, you hear the distant laughter of guests admiring the pup's tricks, biting at rings, weaving through toy hurdles, golden statue of Diana over the hearth, her eyes seeming to follow the dog's every move. You lean back, listening to the gentle scratching of paws on marble, a surprisingly soothing rhythm, almost like a lullaby. You remind yourself of the vet's chalkboard back home listing your dog's allergies. Here, a simple herbal compress would do. As the Pampered parade winds down, you can't help but compare it to your own pup's experience. Mismatched bowls in the kitchen, a favorite squeaky toy half deflated, and leash tangles worthy of an epic tragedy. You stifle a chuckle, appreciating both worlds for their absurdities. A final callback. Remember that pug from Section 1 snoring on a silk cushion? Here, that same pug would have had its cushion washed, scented, and replaced before sunrise with a fresh one, because every Roman dawn demanded perfection. You stand, stretching pale limbs, whisked in a robe as plush as the dog blankets. The valet offers you a final parting gift, a tiny silver token shaped like a paw, inlaid with garnet. Apparently, it's meant to ward off bad dreams for both dog and owner. You tuck it into your palm, savoring its weight. Who knew your next best sleep aid would be ancient Roman pet magic? You slip from the echoing canine corridors into a quieter alcove where the faint rustle of feline fur is the only soundtrack. Here, amid dark porphyry columns and velvety cushions, cats prowl like silent sentinels, present but somehow peripheral. You drape yourself on a low chaise, its velvet cushion cool against your back, and watch as a sleek tabby unfurls from a bronze brazier, blinking lazily at a dying ember. Romans adored cats for keeping vermin at bay, yet you'll notice they never bestowed the same lavish rituals on them as their pampered pups. A mainstream historical fact. By the 1st century CE, domestic cats, Felis catus, had become common in Roman households, often imported from Egypt, where they were venerated as sacred creatures. Romans credited them with protecting precious grain stores from mice, placing them on plinths in granaries. Historians still argue whether these feline guardians doubled as household idols or were simply functional pest controllers. You reach out a hand and feel the cat's soft back. Its fur ripples like silk, though there's no crushed gemstone glitter here, just natural luster. Unlike the spaniel with henna-painted paws you met earlier, cats rarely received painted whiskers or jeweled collars. Instead, many Romans believed cats were too independent for such trappings. A quirky tidbit, some folk remedies called for cats' whiskers to be tied to door hinges to ward off evil spirits, an odd charm compared to the senator who gilded his greyhound's paws. Listen to the soft purring that hums like distant waves. You recall the warm hippocaust beneath the dog quarters. Imagine such luxury for a creature that may bolt at the first clink of a bowl. Instead, cats lounged on windowsills, basking in sunbeams that streamed through narrow apertures, their tails flicking in idle amusement. It's tempting to compare that to your own cat at home, sprawled on the laptop keyboard while you're desperately trying to work. You notice an alabaster statuette of Bastet, the Egyptian cat goddess, perched beside an urn of potpourri. A host's way of acknowledging lineage. Yes, I know you imported beauties from the Nile. Fringe lore suggests some aristocrats trained cats to ring tiny bells when scaring off rodents, though convincing a cat to obey is as fantastical as teaching a parrot to recite Virgil. Historians still argue whether any of these trained tactics were widespread or merely eccentric anecdotes passed down by Roman scribes. A cool breeze wafts through the open atrium, stirring incense embers. You inhale the soft notes of cedar and myrrh, and the cat you were watching pads over, weaving through your legs like a languid ribbon. In one hand, you cradle a goblet of mulsum spiced with honey and cinnamon. In the other, you admire the feline's eyes, emerald lasers glowing in the dim. You think of your own late-night Instagram scroll, double-tapping viral cat videos, and wonder if ancient Romans had their version of viral cat, memes carved into graffiti on Pompeian walls. A more curious detail, Veterinary did offer treatments for cats, though less elaborate than for dogs. A poultice of crushed blackberries was smeared on wounds, and some texts recommend feeding cats dry bread dipped in sour wine to soothe indigestion. Yet you won't find a feline hypocaust or silver grooming brushes, just a humble bucket of fresh fish heads by the kitchen hearth. Quirky fringe tidbit. One apocryphal recipe from a Galenic manuscript suggests wrapping a cat's paw in wool to treat joint pain, though whether anyone ever tried it remains a mystery. You drift closer to a low table strewn with rolled papyrus scrolls depicting hunting scenes, hares, boars, even lions, but never a solitary house cat. That absence speaks volumes. Cats were part of the domestic hum, but never elevated to grand pageants or mosaics alongside mythic beasts. You recall the Grand Dog Parade in Section 2. No such procession honors the aloof feline. A soft chuckle escapes you. In your own neighborhood, the local cat struts like a king on fence posts, yet you can't imagine anyone bothering to stitch it a purple toga. The flicker of an oil lamp casts dancing shadows on the walls. A black cat, a symbol of both luck and mishap, pads past your foot. Some Romans believed that if a black cat crossed your path, fortune would turn. Others swore it heralded plague. Historians still argue whether omen-based cat lore genuinely influenced public health rituals or was dismissed as superstition by rational Romans. You shiver at the thought. The same creature that chased vermin could also be blamed for disease outbreaks in the collective imagination. Your host offers you a small plate of salted fish, which you nibble, savoring the brine. Nearby, a cat curls atop a bundle of laundered togas, its curled tail threatening to unravel the whole stack. You tease it gently, and it arches in response, an invitation you politely decline, mindful of those razor-sharp claws. A fringe tale says that Petronius once wore cat fur as a fashion statement, believing it brought feline grace. Whether that's truth or satire is lost to time, but it makes for a wicked punchline at dinner parties. You sink back into the cushion, the cat now sprawled flat across your lap, purring that deep motor-like hum. The gentle rumble lulls you into a calm trance. You recall Section 1's pug snoring with velvet abandon and Section 2's parade of pampered pups. Here, true luxury lies in the cat's self-possession. There's no need for silk wraps or bronze cradles, just a warm body and a mind that refuses to be owned. A final scholarly note drifts through your drowsy mind. Romans imported cats from North Africa, Phoenicia, and Egypt, but never bred them systematically, leading to a diverse yet unstandardized gene pool, an accidental biodiversity project, if you will. It's unclear whether breeders ever existed or if cats simply mated freely in back alleys. Historians still argue whether any form of proto-cat fancy clubs gathered to trade prized tabbies. You lay your head back, mindful of the cat's rhythmic breathing. The torch flame guttering overhead seems to sync with its purr. A light joke flits through your thoughts. If dogs had molossarii, maybe cats had molossarii escape artists, whose only job was to vanish at feeding time. You wonder at the absurdity, yet admire the cat's mastery of its own allure. In this quiet corner of the villa, you find a different kind of pampering, subtle, unspoken, and entirely earned. No gilded bowls or painted paws, just the cat's silent judgment, and you, content to be its unwitting servant. Let that thought cradle you as you drift back toward the marble halls of memory, where the next act awaits. You leave the cool cat alcove behind, padding softly down a columned corridor where tapestries of jungle foliage obscure flickering torchlight. Ahead, you hear playful chattering, high-pitched, urgent, and impossible to ignore. You round the corner and find yourself in a lush indoor garden, vines draping from stone pergolas, trickling fountains at your feet, and perched among the leaves, several diminutive monkeys. You crane your neck to meet their dark, curious eyes. For a moment, you're not sure who's observing whom. In wealthy Roman villas of the early empire, exotic primates like macaques and gibbons were imported from Africa and Asia as living conversation pieces, scrabbling through painted palms above marble benches. A mainstream historical fact. By the 1st century CE, the Roman elite imported small monkeys via overland caravans from Nubia and trade routes stretching to India, often presenting them at lavish dinner parties as symbols of imperial reach and wealth. The Greek geographer Strabo even noted that some merchants specialized in shipping these creatures through the Red Sea port of Berenice, a journey so arduous many didn't survive. Historians still argue whether the mortality rates were high enough to curb the trade or simply romanticize the peril. You step onto a mosaic floor patterned with cheetahs and lotus flowers, while a capuchin grips a bronze urn rim, dipping toes into olive oil pooled beneath it, an improvised grooming spa apparently. A valet offers you sweet wine diluted with rose water, and you sip thoughtfully as the monkey tilts its head, studying you like a miniature senator. Quirky detail. One sauce-splattered mosaic from Hadrian's villa shows a monkey wearing a tiny toga, clutching a scroll as if to plead legal matters before a canine judge, an image that delights and confounds historians alike. You reach for a low stool carved with vine motifs and settle yourself, your sandals tapping against cool stone. The monkeys leap between rock ledges and citrus trees, their long tails curling around marble balusters. You recall that spaniel strut from Section 2 and the aloof feline from Section 3. Here, you sense an unbridled energy, a wild note in an otherwise curated serenade. One macaque snatches a grape from a silver platter, hops onto your knee, and nibbles it with surprising delicacy, its tiny fingers slick with juice. An offbeat healing practice emerges. Some Roman veterinarians treated imported monkeys for travel stress by wrapping small garlands of lavender and chamomile around their necks, believing the scent would calm them after long sea voyages. Fringe Tidbit, a satirical poem by Marshall Doane, describes a pet monkey so pampered it refused to eat unless fed by a gilded spoon, prompting its owner to commission a spoon the size of a small trident, purely for show. Whether of poetry or reality, historians still debate if such exaggerations were mere literary devices or reflections of actual excess. Historians still argue whether Marshall's biting humor mirrored true household antics or simply mocked elite decadence. You glance upward, tracing the carved coffered ceiling faintly tinted with frescoes of jungles teeming with wildlife. A gibbon, slender-limbed and long-armed, swings into view, clutching a small mirror to inspect its own face. A wave of empathy washes over you. This creature, far from its native rainforests, has adapted to plush villa life, yet you wonder if it ever misses the wild canopy. A chill flicker of self-awareness surfaces. You're essentially on safari inside a marble palace. Nearby, a child of a senator giggles as she hands bananas to a less trusting macaque, its face creased in mock disdain. The child's laughter echoes off stone walls, as effective as any lullaby. You recall how monkeys bring both joy and labor. Caretakers called bestiarii spent hours each day training the primates, teaching them to perform simple tricks, dancing on hind legs, fetching lost coins, or scuttling in elaborate pantomimes of gladiatorial battles. Such acts entertained dinner guests between courses. A fringe anecdote holds that one monkey flipped its trainer so convincingly in a staged mock brawl that the onlookers applauded the ape's skill more than the actors. Your host emerges with 3 little masks, miniature versions of satyr faces carved from olive wood. He fits them to the monkeys' faces as if rehearsing a play. You watch the creatures awkwardly parade in mock tragedy, their chittering cries rising and falling like a chorus of tiny gods. It feels absurd, almost surreal, a tableau vivant of Roman theater with primate understudies. You shift uneasily on your cushion. The moral line between amusement and exploitation seems as faint as the scent of jasmine in the air. A soft debate hums through the assembled guests. Were these primates cherished companions or mere curiosities? Some argue that owners developed genuine affection and lamented deaths as they would for dogs or horses. Others counter that monkeys remained outsiders, valued more for spectacle than sentiment. Historians still argue whether empathic bonds formed or if these animals were forever confined to a novelty role. Historians still argue whether primate pets ever transcended exotic zoo status into true household members. You stand and approach a small pool fed by a terracotta spout. A curious macaque dips a tentative hand into the water, its reflection rippling. Romans believed that occasional baths helped exotic pets acclimate to villa climates and prevented skin parasites. Quirky tidbit: an inscription in a garden niche jokes that the pool was not for the owner's feet, but for the monkey's folly. You can't help but grin at the ancient wit. The sound of distant lute music drifts through an open doorway. You gather yourself, brushes off imaginary dust from your toga, and peer back at the monkeys. One offers you a durian fruit. Imported from India, it smells pungent yet sweet. You accept a small slice, letting the exotic flavor linger on your tongue as you reflect on the scene. Monkeys, suspended between wild instinct and staged performance, embody Roman fascination with control and wonder. As you leave the garden, the monkey's calls fade into the hum of servants, resetting platters and tuning lyres. You recall the pug's cushion, the dog parade, the silent cats, and now this carnival of primates. Each creature brings a distinct note to the symphony of villa life. A gentle joke flickers in your mind. If dogs had molosserii and cats had escape artist reputations, monkeys must have had molosserii turned bodyguards, keeping less trusting guests at bay. You step through a carved marble doorway into a soft, humid chamber that feels almost underwater. The walls are lined with polished travertine, and beneath your feet glitters a shallow pool of emerald-hued water, fed by an ornate bronze spout shaped like a dolphin's head. You slip off your sandals onto the smooth steps and let your toes graze the cool surface. This is the piscina, the grand fish pond, where wealthy Romans showcased aquatic companions like living gemstones. A mainstream historical fact. By the late Republic, affluent villas featured ornamental ponds stocked with exotic fish, mullet from the Mediterranean, lamprey from the Black Sea, and even small sturgeon imported via merchant ships. These piscine halls weren't merely decorative. Fish ponds signaled a host's connections across the empire, boasting the reach of naval trade routes. You lean on the sun-warmed edge, watching slender silver mullet dart beneath floating water lilies. Their scales catch torchlight like spun glass. Nearby, a pair of glimmering golden trout, rumored to be dyed with saffron, hover near a carved oyster shell, waiting for the caretaker's hand to scatter diced crustaceans. A fringe tidbit. One Roman gourmand claimed he trained fish to respond to a special flute tune, so they'd gather at the pond's edge for feeding, like aquatic puppies. Whether that's truth or lofty bragging remains unclear, and historians still argue whether instrumental conditioning of fish was ever widespread or simply fanciful anecdote. In the center of the pond, a marble statue of Neptune looms, his trident raised as if to command the waters. Water spills softly from his crown, creating gentle ripples that lull you into a near trance. You recall the distant dripping fountain from the canine quarters in Section 1. Here, the aquatic drip feels slower, deeper, as if marking a heartbeat for the fish's secret world. A small turtle paddles at your feet, its shell flecked with moss, and for a moment you imagine your own bathtub at home, cluttered with rubber ducks and shampoo bottles. The contrast makes you smile. A valet glides in, carrying a shallow bronze pan of live shrimp and small crabs. He tips them into the pond, and the fish erupt into a swirl of scales and fins. In a corner, a decorative grotto houses a tank of glass-bodied jellyfish swirling like living lanterns. Quirky, yes. Romans borrowed from Eastern curiosities, believing jellyfish venom could cure gout when diluted, but this practice was fringe even then. Historians still debate whether jellyfish pools served medical or purely aesthetic purposes in elite households. You drift toward a mosaic dais depicting a naval battle. Miniature triremes engage beneath painted waves, their carved fishermen poised above. That same mosaic style appears in Section 4's garden floor, forming a thematic link between land and water spectacles. The craftsmanship reminds you of your own digital wallpapers, flat screens rather than gleaming stone, but thus tactile thrill of stepping on glass, tesserae underfoot, beats any modern pixel. Above you, an open oculus reveals a sliver of night sky, letting moonlight spill into the pool. Silvery rays transform the fish into living constellations. You recall Section 3's quiet cat alcove, where low light lent feline fur a soft gleam. Here, light and water dance together, inviting you into a more meditative reverie. The caretaker dips a long-handled net to scoop out a glistening silver carp for inspection. He cradles it in his hands, buffing its scales with a fine linen cloth scented with lotus oil. A mainstream detail. Roman fish keepers often groomed prized specimens much like pets, removing parasites and trimming fins to enhance symmetry. The fish's gills flare gently, and you sense a fleeting connection, as if the carp recognizes its own reflection in your wide eyes. A quip drifts through your mind. If dogs had bell-adorned collars and cats wore no collars, perhaps fish were the only Roman pets who never overstepped their bounds. Yet the true extravagance surfaces when you notice tiny pearls encrusting the rim of the caretaker's pan, an ostentatious flourish to match the marine theme. You sink onto a cushioned bench draped in emerald silk, the color chosen to mirror the pool, and sip a goblet of iced mulsum, spiced wine with honey and crushed almonds. The cool sweetness mingles with the humid, briny air. A fringe anecdote. According to an erotic poet, one decadent host invited guests to submerge delicate pastry boats in fish pond water, then fish out and eat the softened treats. Blissful decadence or watery waste. Historians still argue whether such culinary capers were genuine entertainments or satirical rumors aimed at mocking aristocratic excess. In the corner, a carved shell-shaped grotto houses an aquarium of conger eels, their sinuous bodies weaving through seaweed fronds. Romans considered eels sacred to Venus, believing they promoted fertility when consumed. But here, no one eats these majestic creatures. Instead, they glide past the painted murals of sea nymphs, completing a tableau that blurs myth with reality. A soft debate hums among the attendants. Did these fish ponds serve purely as conversation pieces, or did villa owners develop genuine affection for their marine wards? Some texts record anguished laments when prized carp died, comparable to mourning a lost dog. Others insist these tears were performative, a final flourish in the owner's reputation management. Historians still argue whether any emotional bonds endured beyond the optics of status. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the muffled lap of water and the swish of fins beneath you become a gentle lullaby. In the distance, a servant begins to tune a water organ, its blooping notes drifting through channels beneath the mosaic, filling the room with ephemeral music. You recall Section 2's canine grooming, Section 3's feline repose, Section 4's monkey theater. Now hear a symphony of water as you rise. The fish shimmer and scatter, blinded by torchlight. You flex your toes one last time against the pool's tiled edge, savoring the lingering chill. Ahead, a doorway cloaked in sea-green curtains promises a dry chamber scented with wood smoke and honeyed incense. You step forward, carrying with you the underwater hush of living gems and the knowledge that, for Romans, even fish were invitations to dream. You step through a velvet-draped doorway into a lofty aviary chamber where shafts of light filter through lattice windows and illuminate a riot of feathered song. The air thrums with the melodies of nightingales, the sharp chatter of parrots, and the gentle cooing of doves. You settle onto a cushioned bench carved with laurel leaves, its soft leather reminding you of the emerald silk bench beside the fish pond in Section 5, and watch as the birds flit between perches like living notes in a symphony. A mainstream historical fact. By the early imperial era, Romans prized songbirds, such as nightingales and blackbirds, for their music, capturing them from the wild each spring to keep in gilded cages hung in peristyles and triclinium alcoves. Enthusiasts even held contests to judge whose nightingale sang the longest, highest, or most varied tune. You inhale the heady fragrance of fresh herbs, rosemary and basil, strung around the cage bars to calm the captives and enhance their song. One violet-crowned parrot perches proudly atop its perch, its scarlet beak cracking a sunflower seed with mechanical precision. Quirky tidbit. Some Romans taught parrots to mimic the owner's favorite catchphrase. One wealthy merchant's bird would squawk Ave Dominus whenever dignitaries arrived, earning gasps of delight and occasional embarrassment at dinner parties. Historians still argue whether these linguistic feats were actual mimicry or clever audience projection. You reach out to gently stroke your host's prized goldfinch, nestling in your palm like a living jewel. The bird's plumage gleams with metallic shimmer against your skin, recalling the crushed gemstone-dusted spaniel of Section 2. You wonder if any shimmer remained when the finch took its preening dust bath. You know, the one performed with loose volcanic ash imported from Lipari, believed to ward off mites. Fringe lore suggests that the best bird caretakers kept special pottery feeders shaped like miniature temples to entice the finches to dine more elegantly. You stifle a chuckle, imagining a bird appraising its own habitat Yelp style. A soft whistle drifts through the aviary as a nightingale launches into a melodic crescendo, its song cascading over marble fountains. You remember the dolphin-headed spout from the piscine hall and feel the echo of water in this melodic reverie. In the corner, a scholar's notebook lies open on a pedestal, detailing recipes for bird broth, a dubious tonic of boiled peacock tongue and honey touted to cure seasonal melancholy. You raise an eyebrow at such extravagance, but note the earnest entries in Latin script. Historians still debate whether these recipes were genuine veterinary guides or satirical jabs at elite excess. A caretaker approaches bearing a tray of fresh figs and crushed millet for the smaller songbirds. Beside it sits a shallow bowl of seawater infused with a drop of olive oil, used to bathe the exotic birds and restore feather sheen. Mainstream detail. Veterinary I often recommended such saline baths for birds suffering from molting stress, believing the oil soothed new quill growth. You lean forward, catching the sight of a tame quail pecking daintily at the marble floor. Remarkable, given your own quail salad back home is strictly by mistake when you overcook lunch. You cradle a turquoise parakeet on your fingertip. It scratches your palm affectionately, its tiny claws tickling. A quick joke drifts by. You've been scratched far more by your last haircut than by this polite parrot. Yet part of you envies the companionship. Your own roommate's cat eye never drifts to small avian friends except to plot attack. Glancing upward, you note delicate vines entwine with hanging cages, forming a living canopy that diffuses midday light. One brass cage contains a small owl, its amber eyes fixed on you like a silent judge. Romans admired owls for omens. Fringe whisper has it that some families kept tawny owls in darkened niches, believing their mournful hoots warned of household misfortune. You shudder at the thought. Though the owl's soft feathers beckon you to stroke them, you politely decline. Nearby, a bold African starling struts on a marble perch, its iridescent feathers dazzling under torchlight. A quirky anecdote. Some bird enthusiasts claimed they could train starlings to fetch small scrolls, much like the pigeon post, but confined to the dining room. Historians still argue whether any of these fetching tales were widespread or merely playful stories concocted by poets enjoying their honeyed wine. You sip a goblet of chilled mulsum, its sweet tang a perfect counterpoint to the gentle bird calls. As you swallow, you recall the honeyed wine in Section 2's canine court and marvel at how Romans repurposed flavors across pet pampering. A light joke flits through your mind. If only someone had bottled these bird songs as the latest hit single, nostalgic, 2,000-year-old vinyl style. Across the hall, a parrot begins to rattle its brass bell, an alarm only it knows the code for. You drop a fig into its cage, and it immediately responds by trumpeting a mock heroic war cry. The guests laugh, comparing it to the monkey theater in Section 4. You note the pathos of trained spectacle, monkeys in mock tragedies, parrots as heralds of absurdity, dogs as pampered courtiers, and cats as silent philosophers. Each pet embodies a distinct performance in the living theater of Roman life. A heated debate simmers among the assembled. Were birds kept primarily for their utility? Sound alerts, pest control, and symbolic omens, or did Romans truly cherish them as companions? Scholars still argue whether the sentimental laments recorded upon a prized nightingale's death were heartfelt grief or cleverly composed epitaphs to impress social peers. You feel the weight of that question, hearing the nightingale's tale trill like an unanswered echo. You lean back, letting the melodies wash over you, as soft the lutes begin to strum in a distant alcove. The songbirds chorus crescendos and decrescendos in gentle waves, lulling you into a near dream state. You recall the turtles at your feet in Section 5, the chattering monkeys of Section 4, the purring cats of Section 3, and the pampered pups in Sections 1 and 2, each creature a note in Rome's grand symphony of domestic delight. A final joke enters your reverie. If birds held contests for the best song, you'd definitely lose your chess tournament against the parakeet any day. You imagine yourself bowing on stage, accepting a golden laurel wreath shaped like a sparrow's wing. The thought brings a sleepy grin to your face. A gentle hush falls as the caretaker dims the torchlights, letting the lattice windows glow with moonlight. The birds settle on their perches, preening the last feathers of dusk. You stand, stretching out a hand to stroke a dove, its coo so soft it almost disappears into the warm silence. You feel the heartbeats of Italy's nights in its velvet wings. Ahead, the ornithological concert fades, and a heavy wooden door carved with eagle motifs creaks open, revealing a corridor scented with incense and warmed by braziers for the next marvel, the reptiles waiting in their sun-dappled chamber. You step forward, ears still ringing with song, ready for the next act in this tate of terrestrial wonders. You step through a carved serpentine archway into a chamber where the air feels cool and still, as if you've entered a quiet grotto far from the villa's bustle. The walls are painted in deep green frescoes of winding vines and creeping basilisk forms, and torches flicker against polished onyx pedestals. At your feet, a shallow breeze whispers from hidden vents, just enough to rustle the scales of creatures lounging on sculpted rock ledges. This is the reptile salon, where wealthy Romans kept snakes and lizards as living curiosities, and apparently conversation starters. A mainstream historical fact. By the 2nd century CE, affluent Romans often collected exotic reptiles, such as Egyptian crocodile hatchlings, though rarely kept long, Mediterranean grass snakes, and colorful lizards imported from Africa and the Levant, as symbols of conquest and control over nature. Pliny the Elder even describes a Roman noble who boasted of owning a banded cobra that would bask under an amber lamp, its pattern glowing in the firelight. Historians still argue whether these menageries reflected genuine fascination with herpetology or served purely as ostentatious trophies of imperial reach. You approach a low pool carved into black marble, where a trio of emerald green lizards slink over flat stones warmed by concealed braziers. Their tongues flicker out, tasting the humid air. A valet offers you a goblet of cooled mulsum, infused with crushed ivy leaves, said to sharpen the senses for observing reptiles. You hold it gingerly, recalling the chilled fish pond wine in Section 5 and the honeyed wine of Section 2. Here, the flavor feels unexpectedly astringent, making you appreciate your own modern iced tea all the more. On a pedestal nearby, a coiled serpent rests its head on a velvet cushion, its body patterned like rippling river shadows. You may remember the gilded spaniel throne from Section 2 or the lapcat's silky cushion in Section 3. This snake's perch is every bit as regal, lined with the skins of black vipers turned to plush. Quirky tidbit, one senator famously wrapped his pet snake in a crimson ribbon each dawn so it would awake in imperial style, a practice that undoubtedly made morning feeding ceremonies feel like costly pageantry. You crouch beside a cage of small skinks playing hide and seek among ornate amber pebbles. Their scales glint like flecks of gold under torchlight. You recall the parrots that mimicked Ave Dominus in Section 6. Imagine a lizard trained to nod at its owner's entrance. Fringe lore suggests some caretakers attempted just that, tying tiny copper bells around their tails so the lizard's timid slinks would announce their arrival. Whether any of those creatures ever obeyed, let alone produced a reliable doorbell, is lost to time, and historians still argue whether such training ever truly succeeded. A gentle hiss draws your gaze to a glass tank embedded in the wall. Here, a desert monitor clambers over sandstone rockwork that mimics its natural habitat. You rest a hand on the cool glass, feeling the vibration of its powerful muscles. A valet hands you a small brush made of boar bristles and instructs you to gently remove any shed skin. Romans believed that milking lizard oil and mixing it with olive oil produced an exotic salve for muscle aches, a fringe medicinal tidbit you find hard to swallow, much like the thought of your neighbor's iguana giving you a back rub. You stand and drift toward a shallow basin lined with smooth pebbles where a handful of garter snakes swim lazily through warm water. One drifts over your toes, tickling you with a subtle shimmy, and you jerk back, half in surprise, half in delight. A playful joke flits through your mind. Nothing says luxury like a snake pedicure. You chuckle, imagining your own feet back home, scrubby pumice stones and cheap pedicure kits pale in comparison to this scaly spa treatment. The frescoed ceiling above depicts Diana the Huntress, bow drawn as her dog chases a stag, an odd companion to reptilian decor. You recall the hunting mosaics in Section 5 and Section 4's jungle tapestries. Here, the association feels less intuitive, yet Romans often linked snakes to chthonic deities and household protection. Fringe anecdote. Some families kept a small, harmless snake in the cellar, believing its silent presence warded off vermin and unclean spirits. Whether the snake ever caught a single rat or simply napped away, historians still argue whether its protective reputation was based on superstition or simple myth. A soft debate drifts through the hushed chamber. Are these reptiles cherished companions or exotic curiosities exploited for shock value? Some guests insist that owners formed genuine emotional bonds, citing laments inscribed on tombstones for beloved lizards lost too soon. Others counter that inscriptions were clever metaphors, not heartfelt grief. Historians still argue whether any true affection underpinned these stylized epitaphs, or if they were merely poetic flourishes meant to impress visiting dignitaries. You run a fingertip along the rim of a glass lantern containing a curled adder, its eyes tracking your movement. The snake wraps and unwraps itself in slow, deliberate motions. You stare back, wondering if you dare cradle it as a pet. Your own cat's purr seems downright tame compared to this silent, constricting sway. A light joke surfaces. If dogs had Molisari attendants and cats had escape artist reputations, snakes must have had Molisari slitherari, dedicated handlers who whispered sweet nothings so the snakes wouldn't get lonely. A glass window to one side overlooks the villa's lush, peristyle garden. Moonlight filters through olive trees, casting silvery patterns on the floor. A slender viper slides from shadow into light, its belly glowing like molten silver. You sigh at the quiet drama. This creature's performance requires no gilded props or tiny togas. Your host approaches with a silver tray, bearing delicate tarts made of goat cheese, thyme, and preserved figs. You accept one, the tang of cheese offset by sweet fig glaze. Nearby, a pale green gecko clings to a column, watching you nibble with apparent interest. You half expect it to offer you a sip of Mulsum, but instead it flicks its tongue and scurries off. You give it a dramatic bow, true reptilian etiquette. To leave, you must navigate past a pair of juvenile crocodiles in a sunken stone basin, kept briefly as teething toys before being gifted to the Colosseum. Their tiny teeth gleam dangerously even now. You recall the monkey's stage antics in Section 4 and the parrot's war cries in Section 6. These crocodiles require no training to capture attention. A playful grin crosses your face. Sometimes, raw power outperforms the most elaborate spectacle. As you step back into the torchlit corridor, the hiss of serpents fades, but lingers in your ears like an unspoken promise. You feel a shiver of respect for these cold-blooded companions, and a relief to return to warmer company. Ahead, the hallway narrows, lit by flickering oil lamps scented with frankincense, guiding you to the next chamber. Displays of pet attire and accessories, where tiny togas await their furry and scaly wearers. You step into a grand courtyard that smells faintly of dust and burnt oil, where a semicircle of marble benches rises like an amphitheater around a central sand-covered arena. A hush falls over the dozen or so guests gathered here, robes rustling softly as your host strides in, carrying a slender rod tipped with a silver bell. This is no gladiatorial combat. Today's entertainment features your familiar domestic companions in spectacles designed to amaze. You settle onto a low bench at the edge of the sand sifting through your toes, and the bell's single chime ripples through the air, calling the show to order. A mainstream historical fact. From the Republic through the Imperial era, wealthy Romans staged Venetian and novelty acts in private courtyards, featuring tame bears, dogs, birds, and even trained monkeys, all performing for select audiences. These private spectacles paralleled the public games, but on a smaller, more intimate scale, allowing you to witness feats of animal training away from the roar of the Colosseum. Historians still argue whether these private shows served primarily as displays of power or genuine appreciation for animal skill. Your heart skips as a procession of lapdogs trots in, each wearing a tiny leather harness studded with bronze rivets. The handler snaps his fingers, and the dogs begin weaving between pillars set across the sand, leaping through hoops fashioned from wreaths of laurel leaves. You gasp at a little spaniel clearing 3 hoops mid-air, landing on all fours with perfect poise. A quirky tidbit. One Roman entertainer, supposedly trained his smallest lapdog to pirouette on its hind legs until dizzy, then recover with a theatrical bow, an act so absurd that some guests claim the dog was secretly fueled by liquid honey courage, though whether that's fact or rumor is lost to time. Next, the bell rings again, and the handler ushers in a quartet of doves, their wings pre-clipped so they cannot fly away. They bob and flutter in unison, pecking at grains scattered in a mosaic pattern that spells out the patron's name, a clever publicity stunt as much as a performance. You lean forward to catch every movement, amazed at the bird's discipline. In your mind, you compare this to your own reluctant house sparrows who balk at landing on your windowsill for seed. A gentle poke. If only modern pigeons would spell your name in seed crumbs, your Instagram feed would explode. The sand stirs as two handlers lead forward, a pair of juvenile bears, their muzzles gilded with delicate filigree masks. You feel the ground tremble with each lumbering step. At a signal, the bears rear up to tap small bronze bells hung at head height, one with each paw, producing a deep, resonant chime. The audience applauds as if greeting a famous orator. A fringe detail, a satirical graffito discovered in Pompeii, mockingly describes a pet bear so well trained it would dole out wine goblets to guests, though whether anyone ever tested, that claim is up for debate, and historians still argue if bears ever really served wine or simply delivered hollow theater. A sudden rustle at the far end of the arena draws your gaze. A line of hedgehogs, each balanced atop a polished marble ball. The handler jabs at the sand, coaxing them to roll forward in a clumsy parade. You stifle a laugh at the sight of prickly backs wiggling as they edge forward, and you remember the sleek fish in Section 5 gliding through water with effortless grace. Here, land creatures navigate motion with adorable awkwardness. Historians still argue whether these animals enjoyed such training or endured it with stoic resignation. The bell rings thrice, and the centerpiece act arrives, a troop of small monkeys in togas, each holding a scroll and quill. They clamber onto a low platform and proceed to write their owner's name on a wax tablet with astonishing accuracy. Well, accuracy by Roman standards, which you suspect allowed generous interpretation of squiggles. You lean so far forward, your robes brush the sand, enthralled by the sight. A quirky tidbit to share later. A rumor claims that one monkey refused to write unless bribed with figs, steeped in honey and pepper, a culinary combination so pungent even human guests balked at tasting it. Now, the hush returns as two handlers wheel in a miniature ship replica wheeled on 4 bronze wheels. At the prow sits a trained otter, clad in tiny brass armor, holding a trident and steering with practiced paw strokes. You blink, half expecting the whole thing to be a mirage of sand and candlelight. The otter dips its paws into a shallow trough of water before leaping aboard, its fur sleek and movements sure. Historians still argue whether such aquatic performances were even real or simply fanciful tales spread by gossiping courtiers, but here you are, watching it unfold. You realize you're tapping your foot in time with invisible music. Unseen musicians hidden behind a low wall play lyres and flutes to underscore each act. You recall the water organ in Section 5 and the lute in Section 6. Here, the music keeps pace with animal choreography, weaving an auditory tapestry that heightens every leap and flutter. You inhale the scent of crushed rosemary tossed into the sand, a subtle stimulant said to keep animals alert, another fringe practice whose efficacy scholars still debate. As the final act begins, a handler unveils a line of tame crocodiles, mouths gently bound with cloth to prevent nips. You swallow hard at their scaly heads poking through the sand, and then they begin a synchronized slide, bodies undulating like living draperies across the arena floor. You can't tear your eyes away. These ancient beasts, symbols of raw power, now perform with uncanny coordination. A light joke flits through your mind. If these crocs were Olympic athletes, they'd win gold in the sand crawl relay, though no medals exist for scaled competitors. The bell sounds a final time, and the arena fills with servants scattering rose petals. The handlers herd the animals back to hidden entrances, and the guests rise to applaud, robes swishing like water across marble. You rise too, brushing sand from your toga, and catch your reflection in a polished shield propped against a column, a face flushed with exhilaration, eyes wide as Roman amphorae. Private pet spectacles, you muse, blur the line between affection and exploitation, mixing genuine marvel with blatant status display. Historians still argue whether audiences left these events moved by animal loyalty or simply impressed by the host's wealth. As you step past the threshold back into the villa's quieter corridors, the echo of distant bells and the faint rattle of scales linger. You recall the purring lapdog of Section 1, the meticulously groomed dogs of Section 2, the aloof cats of Section 3, the chattering monkeys of Section 4, the underwater hush of Section 5, the birdsong concert in Section 6, and now this pageant of pets performing under torchlight. Each act rings in your mind like a chapter of a living myth. You rub the sand from between your toes, feeling both privileged and unsettled by the intimacy of these spectacles. Ahead, a doorway draped in crimson awaits, promising a glimpse into the fashion and finery that draped pets in the next act: tiny togas, jeweled collars, and feathered boas. You take a deep breath, savoring the mingled scents of rosemary and sand, and move forward with the memory of clinking bells echoing softly in your bones. You step through a low archway into a chamber suffused with soft lamplight and the gentle hum of whispered admiration. The walls are draped in heavy tapestries dyed in vermilion and violet, colors reserved for those with imperial favor, and every surface gleams with gilt bronze. Ahead, a series of pedestals holds an array of miniature garments and glittering accessories, arranged like offerings in a temple. This is the wardrobe of Rome's most fashionable pets, where collars sparkle brighter than concubines' necklaces, and tiny togas rival those of actual senators in craftsmanship. You approach the first display, a line of collars fashioned from interwoven gold and silver threads, each set with precious stones, amethysts, garnets, and emeralds, arranged in patterns echoing imperial eagles and laurel wreaths. A quirk. Some collars were engraved with witty phrases like Fido Optime, best dog, meant to amuse dinner guests rather than just announce ownership. Historians still argue whether these engraved collars were worn daily or only donned for grand banquets. On the next pedestal lies a series of miniature togas, scaled down to fit lapdogs and even cats. The finest are woven from Tyrian purple cloth, a hue so rare and expensive that only the emperor himself could legally wear the full-length version. Yet here, a chihuahua-sized toga in that same dye drapes across a tiny mannequin. You imagine your own wardrobe and smirk at the thought of a toddler's Halloween costume costing more than your entire wardrobe budget. fringe detail. One extravagant matron allegedly commissioned a toga for her spaniel so voluminous it trailed behind the dog like a bridal gown, requiring 2 attendants to fluff it after every step. Beside the togas, you see a rack of booties and little sandals, mini caligae, crafted from soft calfskin and embroidered with family crests. A mainstream fact, Roman dog owners sometimes shod their pups to protect delicate paws from hot pavement and abrasive roads. Yet these decorative boots serve more as status symbols than practical gear. A playful joke crosses your mind. If you saw your neighbor's pug clomping down the street in gold-studded sandals, you'd wonder whether it was on its way to the forum or the spa. You pause at a glass case containing necklets for cats, slender chains of silver set with tiny bells fashioned to sound like wind chimes. Cats, however, notoriously despise noise, so these accessories were probably model displays rather than actual wearables. A quirky lore whisper that a certain senator's cat would stealthily remove its necklet each night, hiding the bells under the bed. Historians still debate whether feline disdain or feline cleverness was the real reason for the empty display racks. Across the room, another pedestal showcases pet tiaras and diadems. On delicate circlets of gold leaves, stamped with honeybee motifs, was designed for a lapdog believed to descend from Apollo's hounds. A fringe rumor suggests that some tiaras held tiny vials of perfume, rose oil infused with myrrh, to scent the animal as it passed through corridors. Some guests swore they caught whiffs of jasmine as their host's greyhound trotted by, though whether that was perfume or their imagination remains unsettled. You turn to admire a long velvet robe, trimmed with ermine fur, sized for a Cerberus breed dog. The robe's lining is embroidered with scenes of the underworld, shades fleeing from Pluto's hounds, an ironic nod to the dog's mythological namesake. A scholarly aside, Romans often named pets after mythic figures, but historians still argue whether these names carried any symbolic significance for the animal's treatment or were purely playful literary references. Nearby, a selection of grooming tools awaits: ivory-handled brushes, bronze combs, and tiny shears shaped like swans' necks. You recognize the same boar bristle brushes from Section 2's dog salon, but here they gleam like jewelry. Fringe grooming practice. Some owners applied a paste of ground pearls and pumice to smooth fur into elaborate pompadour styles, making their pets appear as if coiffed by the famed beauty worker Phryne herself. You stifle a laugh imagining your own bedhead spruced up with pearl dust each morning. The air is scented with incense, frankincense, and styrax that mingles with a waft of warm leather. You close your eyes briefly, picturing your cat at home attempting to untangle itself from a novelty sweater. You recall Section 3's aloof feline. Here, the fashion-forward cat might stage a silent protest by turning its back at mealtime. A gentle jab. If only your cat wore a tiny vest, you'd have an excuse for its grumpy attitude. A velvet-lined tray holds an array of pet jewelry, tiny bracelets embossed with serpents, rings sized for hedgehogs, complete with rose quartz settings, and amulets bearing protective symbols, an eye of Horus pendant, thought to ward off the evil glance. Mainstream detail. Romans believed that amulets could protect both human and animal. Some collars bore phallic charms for good luck, though historians still argue whether this practice was serious superstition or ribald humor. In one corner, a mannequin sports an elaborate feathered boa draped over its shoulders. The feathers, peacock, pheasant, and even ostrich were collected from imperial hunts and stitched together in patterns of flaming torches. Fringe tidbit: some hosts awarded feather boas to pets as victory garlands after successful performances in private spectacles. Imagine your dog parading in a boa that once adorned a senator's grand entrance. The absurdity brings a sleepy grin to your face. As you wander, a valetty approaches with a silver platter bearing pet-sized perfume bottles, tiny alabaster flasks engraved with laurel wreaths. He uncorks one, releasing a swirl of rose, cinnamon, and cedarwood. You dab a drop on your wrist and marvel at how even scent became a marker of taste and status. You remember the lavender garlands for monkeys in Section 4 and the cedar incense in Section 3. Here, each fragrance signals a different social message. A hushed debate drifts among nearby guests. Were these accessories expressions of genuine love and care, or mere displays of wealth designed to outshine rivals? Some insist that dressing pets in exquisite finery deepened emotional bonds, while others argue it degraded animals to living status symbols. Historians still debate whether the tactile comfort of a velvet robe brought solace to the pet or simply amused onlookers. You arch an eyebrow as you spot a tiny silk fan attached to a collar, perhaps to cool a pampered pup during the heat of noon. A light joke crosses your mind. If your own fan broke, you'd settle for chasing the dog just to feel a breeze. You pick up the fan and let it flutter, releasing a faint puff of rosewater spray. Finally, you step back, gazing at the entire display like an art patron before a gallery. Every collar, garment, and trinket tells a story of Roman extravagance, creativity, and the complex interplay between affection and ostentation. You recall the monk-eyed, mirror-clutching gibbon, the jeweled fish scales, the bird's miniature temple feeders. Now this, a testament to how far humans will go to celebrate their companions. You breathe deeply, breathing in that heady mix of incense, velvet, and metal. The soft echo of your own footsteps blends with distant lute strings drifting in from the aviary. Ahead lies the veterinary clinic, whispers of poultices and scalpels beckoning you next. You lift your hand to brush a non-existent bit of dust from your toga, ready to step into the chamber where care meets spectacle once more. You step into a chamber suffused with the calming scent of herbs, lavender, rosemary, and crushed rue strewn in woven baskets along the walls. Soft mats cushion the stone floor, and oil lamps flicker beside neatly arranged shelves of earthenware jars. This is the Valetudinarium Animalium, the Roman veterinary clinic where beloved pets receive treatments as carefully as any human patient. You settle onto a low bench beside a basin of warm water infused with honey and olive oil, watching as a valet in a wool tunic gently tends to a Labrador-like hound's swollen paw. A mainstream historical fact: Romans employed trained veterinaries, specialist animal doctors, by the 2nd century CE, who treated both livestock and household pets. Their methods appear in texts like Columella's De Re Rustica and Pliny's Natural History, which describe poultices, cauterization, and surgical extraction of splinters. Historians still argue whether these treatments were widely applied to pets or reserved only for high-value animals. You feel the warmth of the dressing as it's applied, imagining the sting of vinegar-soaked lint pressed against tender flesh. Beside you, a valet opens a jar of pale green salve, thick as honey. He smears a glob across a spaniel's limping leg, an ungentle mix of pepper, ash, and crushed mint reputed to stimulate circulation. A quirky tidbit: some recipes instructed owners to burn crocodile dung into ash, believing its alkaline properties promoted wound healing, an idea so fringe even contemporaries joked about it in satirical verses. You inhale sharply, grateful for modern antibiotics. A gentle hiss draws your attention to a lizard perched on a small table, its skin flaking from recent shedding. The veterinarian examines it under a bronze lamp, pronouncing the condition simple ecdysis delay. He prescribes a compress of boiled grape leaves and fine sand to exfoliate gently, then a bath in lukewarm perfumed water to soothe irritation. You recall the reptile salon's velvet cushions in Section 7, and here you witness velvet smooth care for scaly patients. You glance at a meticulously labeled shelf: jars hold Den's mures, powdered mice teeth, sold as a biliary sedative, dried nightingale hearts touted to improve a bird's vocal range, and flakes of pearl recommended for enhancing coat sheen in lapdogs. Fringe lore suggests one veterinarian wrote that a cat suffering from indigestion could be cured by swallowing a live snail, its mucus acting as an internal bandage, an apocryphal claim that makes you shudder. Historians still argue whether such bizarre remedies were ever practiced or merely circulated among intrepid apothecaries. Nearby, a marble slab serves as a surgical table. A greyhound with a thorn lodged in its paw lies motionless as the veterinarian clamps a heated bronze hook to cauterize around the thorn before extraction. He murmurs reassurance in Latin, invoking Celsus's recommendation to calm animals vocally during surgery. You marvel at the stoicism of the dog, its eyes half closed, whiskers trembling in the lamplight. A light joke crosses your mind. If only your own dentist hummed lullabies while drilling. On another bench, a tortoise reclines as a valet gently polishes its shell with a paste of olive oil and pumice, intended to buff away algae and parasites. A mainstream detail: Romans believed that periodic polishing kept turtle shells healthy, preventing fissures that could harbor harmful organisms. You watch the rhythmic circular strokes, recalling the silk grooming brushes from Section 2 and the pearl paste pompadour from Section 9. Here, the humble turtle receives similar devoted attention. To your right, a marble trough holds steaming water infused with ladanum gum, a resin believed to ease joint pain. A mastiff-sized molossus wades in, its broad shoulders dipping beneath the surface as it stands patiently. The veterinarian massages the dog's legs with a mixture of olive oil and crushed lavender, chanting a soothing cadence. Fringe anecdote: one elite owner insisted his spaniel receive daily hydrotherapy in a miniature heated pool, complete with a nurse to stroke its ears and recite poetry, an extravagance that rivals any modern pet spa. Historians still argue whether such hydrotherapy was therapeutic or mere luxury. A sudden cry draws your attention to a parrot perched on a brass stand. Its tail feathers are frayed, and it screeches as the valet examines its syrinx area. A poultice of vine leaves and lard is smoothed over the throat to reduce inflammation. You remember the aviary's fragrant rosemary garlands in Section 6 and note how remedies often reused common herbs. A scholarly aside notes that the quality of veterinary care varied widely. Some texts imply that many veterinary specialized in horses and livestock rather than pampered pets, raising questions about the skill level behind pet treatments. Historians still argue whether domestic pets received truly expert veterinary attention or secondhand care from farriers and farmhands. Your gaze shifts to a carved wooden cabinet filled with surgical instruments, scalpels of bronze, forceps with ivory handles, and curved needles for suturing wounds. A valet disinfects a scalpel in boiling water before setting it on a pewter tray. You shiver, picturing a spaniel's lip being stitched after a bar fight with another dog. Quirky tidbit. Some owners carried portable surgical kits for travel, complete with a small bone saw for amputations in emergencies. One satirical epigram claims that a senator's dog had its tail lopped off on the Appian Way and recovered with aplomb, later receiving a silver prosthetic tip. Historians still argue whether prosthetics for pets were real inventions or literary embellishments. The room's far corner holds a cool ceramic oven used for warming poultice jars and drying bandages. You watch as a valet removes a clay pot lined with papyrus and fills it with hot olive oil, then places it near the surgeon's table to keep the salves at body temperature. You feel a curious warmth from the oven, mixing comfort with the faint odor of cooking clay. A punny thought flits by. This is as close as you'll get to a Roman pet sauna. A nurse enters carrying a small casket draped in linen. Inside lies a neatly bandaged spaniel's leg, amputation after a severe injury. The veterinarian gently picks up the casket, whispering a final blessing to Ceres for a quick recovery. You sense genuine compassion in his touch, a quiet counterpoint to the ostentation you've witnessed elsewhere. Here, care transcends spectacle, even if only for a moment. You stand and stretch, the herbal scents lingering in your nostrils like a lullaby. You think of your own pet's vet visits, the antiseptic smell of modern clinics, hushed hallways, and clinical air, and contrast them with the lamplit warmth of this ancient infirmary. A playful jab. At least today's vets don't ask you to mix crocodile dung ash. As you step toward the door, the valet hands you a small satchel of medicinal herbs, mint for digestion, chamomile for anxiety, and rue for its reputed protective powers. He nods solemnly, and you tuck the satchel into your robe pocket, feeling the weight of centuries of animal care traditions. Ahead lies a chamber draped in black marble and framed by cypress trees, the sanctuary of remembrance, where Romans mourned and honored their departed companions. You pause, inhaling the last wisps of lavender, and cross the threshold for the final chapter of pet devotion. You follow a narrow corridor lined with solemn cypress trees, their dark foliage whispering overhead as if offering quiet condolences. Ahead, a low iron gate swings open onto a tranquil courtyard of soft white marble, where tiny gravestones cluster like delicate flowers in a garden. This is the locus memorialis for departed companions, a pet cemetery where Romans honored their bestial friends in death as they did in life. You step onto a path of crushed alabaster, each crunch underfoot echoing like a whispered farewell. Here, lapdogs lie beneath diminutive sarcophagi carved with paw prints and playful scenes. One shows a pug chasing mice through a mosaic labyrinth, another a greyhound leaping over stylized waves. A mainstream historical fact. By the 2nd century CE, inscriptions for pets, especially dogs and birds, began appearing on funerary altars and tombstones, commemorating names, ages, and even brief epitaphs like Fidelis Canis, faithful dog, or Carmen Avium, Songbird's Song, reflecting genuine affection. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions represent heartfelt grief or social spectacle. You lean close to one stele, etched with a lapwing in flight, and feel the cool marble press against your palm. A fringe tidbit. Some families buried cats in ornate wooden boxes with miniature clay fish and bird charms tucked under their paws, believing these offerings would accompany them in a better afterlife. You brush a fallen petal from a feline gravestone and recall the solitary cats of Section 3, silent sentinels in life, now immortalized in stone. You imagine your own cat at home, being interred with its jingling necklet, and wonder if it would feel comforted. Soft doves coo overhead, their feathers brushing the tops of headstones like gentle wings of remembrance. You recall the evening chorus of Section 6 and smile at the cemetery, birds singing at both life's beginning and end. Here the air smells faintly of rosemary and ground myrtle, traditional mourning herbs strewn across graves to soothe spirits. A quirky detail: some Romans sprinkled crushed, mulsum-soaked bread over the graves, believing the honey's sweetness would sweeten the soul's journey. Historians still debate whether such culinary rites were common practice or poetic exaggeration in elegiac poems. You wander past a miniature mausoleum crowned with a carved frieze, puppies frolicking beneath a weeping willow. Inside, urns hold the ashes of a spaniel named Lux, her epitaph praising light in my darkest hours. A mainstream detail: cremation of pets became more prevalent in the late Empire, mirroring human funerary trends. Romans collected ashes in small cinerary urns shaped like bird cages or miniature amphorae, sometimes inscribed with tender lines, non omnis moriar, I shall not wholly die. You trace the lettering with your fingertip, feeling the deliberate indentations. A hush falls as you approach a raised platform bearing wreaths of dried flowers, poppies, violets, and straw flowers, arranged in loops the size of hamster wheels. A caretaker kneels to place a fresh sprig of myrtle at the base of a tortoise tomb, murmuring a short prayer to Ceres for a peaceful rest. You recall the humble turtle of Section 10 receiving its polish. It seems fitting that such a patient creature would be honored with unhurried rituals. Elsewhere, a pediment portrays a parrot perched on a laurel branch, head tilted skyward. Beneath, the inscription reads, Conjunx Volacrum, spouse of birds, suggesting the owner saw the avian companion as a true life partner. Fringe lore suggests some tomb inscriptions for parrots included banquet menus, so guests could feed the spirit on commemorative feast days, though whether anyone ever left seeds or indeed attended these bird banquets remains uncertain. Historians still argue whether these menu inscriptions were sincere offerings or satirical barbs at elite eccentricity. You chuckle at the image of a ghostly parrot expecting grapes at a spectral feast. You pause at a simple grave, marked only by a plain stone slab. No name, no carving, just a shallow depression that once held the body of a fierce crocodile, its jaws bound in life and now stilled forever. A quiet joke drifts through your mind. If those juvenile crocs from Section 8 had lived out their days here, their epitaph might read, he snapped up more than he let go. You shiver, imagining cheeky epitaphs scrawled by grieving pet lovers with a dark sense of humor. The path curves around to a small temple-like structure dedicated solely to mourning. Inside, niches hold portrait reliefs of beloved animals: a hound with attentive ears, a monkey clutching a grape, a nightingale poised on a branch, mid-song. A perfumed lamp burns beneath each relief, offering perpetual light. A mainstream fact: tomb chapels for pets sometimes adjacent to human family mausolea, attest to the blurred boundary between human and animal in Roman domestic religion. Yet historians still debate whether these pet chapels were signs of deep companionship or clever social posturing designed to display the owner's piety and wealth. Historians still argue whether such chapels reflect true spiritual kinship or ostentatious religiosity. You rest on a low bench of travertine, the cool stone comforting as marble cushions once did. The air is hushed, punctuated only by distant footfalls of caretakers refilling oil lamps. You run your fingers over a weathered relief of a spaniel beside its owner, noting how the dog's eyes meet the human's in eternal gaze. A poignant whisper, "I was more than a pet." You close your eyes, letting the memory of each creature, pugs, cats, fish, birds, monkeys, reptiles, coalesce into a single tapestry of devotion. A stray thought drifts in. Today, pet cemeteries still sprawl in quiet corners of modern cities, echoing these ancient rituals. You imagine future archaeologists uncovering your own pet's limestone urn, wondering at the tiny bell you buried with it. A light joke surfaces. Perhaps they'd think your Labrador demanded nightly wine offerings too. You smile, recognizing that across 2 millennia, the impulse to honor animal friends in death remains the same. You stand, moving toward the gate as torchlight from the courtyard heralds the final wind down of your journey through Roman pet devotion. The hush here lingers in your bones like the softest lullaby, a fitting prelude to the dreamscape awaiting beyond. Slow the rhythm now, gentle steps through memory's corridors. Let each breath loosen the weight of marble and incense. You've traced paw prints on mosaic floors and heard birdsong in candlelit halls, felt the cool water of fish ponds lap at your toes, stroked velvet fur and scaled skin, witnessed practices both tender and strange. The world of ancient Rome, with its marble palaces and scented gardens, now recedes like tide. Your heart holds both laughter at monkeys and togas, parrots screaming Ave Dominus, and quiet awe at the depths of devotion carved in stone. Imagine the cypress leaves stirring above the pet cemetery, a soft green murmuration bidding farewell. Let the fragrant rosemary drift through your mind, recalling how Romans wove herbs into both healing and mourning. Embrace the gentle hush of loss, balanced by the warmth of remembrance. Each marble headstone, each tiny sarcophagus, speaks of bonds forged in daily care and play. In that hush, find gratitude for your own companions, their softness, their quirks, the simple comfort of their presence. Draw in a slow breath. Feel the hush fill your chest, then exhale any lingering unrest. Words fade as memories settle, like leaves drifting down onto white marble paths. Sleep beckons, cool, calm, and unbroken. Now drift beyond these corridors of pet devotion. Let the weight of ages settle away. In the quiet beyond consciousness, hear the distant drip of fountains, the soft rustle of woven fabrics, the faint echo of a dog's snore. Rest easy, carried by the gentle tide of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.